Good evening and welcome to Poland Daily. My name is Natalia Moczulska and this is the news. Less than 24 hours have passed since the signing of an agreement between Russia, Ukraine, Turkey and the United Nations on the safe export of grains from Ukrainian ports when Russian rockets fell on Odesa. Kyiv calls this the spit in the face of Turkey and the UN by Putin. But it was not only this Ukrainian city that fell victim to Russian air raids in the last 24 hours. This could have been a breakthrough agreement in the war started by Russia, when separate but the same content documents on safe grain exports from Ukrainian ports were signed by Russia's Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and Ukrainian Infrastructure Minister Oleksandr Kubrakov.
And let there be no doubt, this is an agreement for the world. It will bring relief for developing countries on the edge of bankruptcy and the most vulnerable people on the edge of famine.
24 hours have not passed since the agreement was signed, when missiles hit Odesa. Odesa is one of the 3 key Ukrainian ports from which it was planned to ship the outstanding grain by sea. The Ukrainian armed forces managed to knock down 2 of the 4 missiles. The Russians attacked the very place where grain is stored in the Odesa port. This is how much the contracts signed with the country that sponsors terrorism are worth. Russian missiles have also hit other parts of Ukraine. They hit air and rail infrastructure in the Kirovgrad region. 3 people were killed, 13 were injured. Kharkiv and Mykolaiv were also shot at. Alarm sirens were sounding from this morning almost all over Ukraine. Russia continues shelling the cities, although it has suspended its offensive at the front. They are probably no longer able to carry out any further offensive to cover up this stalemate on the eastern front. Russia has been using the methods of rocket terrorism against civilians, which have been well known for 5 months. One point of the grain export agreement contains an entry not to shell civilian infrastructure located in ports responsible for loading grain onto transport vessels. The diplomatic action that has lasted for a month has now come down to the fact that the document failed. According to the Ukrainian side, approximately 240 Russian soldiers have been killed in the last 24 hours. In total, Moscow was to lose nearly 40,000 military personnel and more than 1,700 tanks since the start of the war. U.S. HIMARS launchers are proving invaluable in conducting artillery fire. Thanks to these missile systems, Russian air raids decreased by a minimum 5-fold. The United States is planning further deliveries. Ukraine is talking more and more about the counteroffensive, but to get started, it must first obtain more weapons from the West. Defending a territory is something else, and such defense is sometimes even done through very simple paths. When you need to drive the enemy out of the occupied territory, you have to use the equipment which Zelensky constantly talks about, that they badly need tanks and especially barrel and rocket artillery. The United States, Great Britain and Poland are the undisputed leaders in the supply of weapons to Ukraine. On the other hand, Germany, despite earlier assurances, is not fulfilling its obligations. I have already explained on several occasions that we need to look specifically at the artillery to see how we can provide Ukraine with more support. We can't get tanks for Ukraine right away. There is also an impasse between Warsaw and Berlin regarding the transfer of German tanks to Poland. Now it turns out that there would only be 20 German Leopards. The Polish Ministry of Defense has donated almost 300 T-72 tanks to the fighting Ukraine. 20 tanks is a bit of a silly number, because the minimum number we expect, well, at least for one battalion, such a subunit, is about 50 tanks. In the negotiation process, the less information is communicated to the public, the better, because we talk about artillery and that the Polish army is rearming. I am a Varsovian, and I will probably remember for the rest of my life my grandmother's saying, "Don't be fooled." And this seems to be the case. We were fooled by the bastards. Ratings agency Fitch has downgraded Ukraine after the country began the formal process of deferring payments on its external bonds and restructuring nearly $23 billion in sovereign debt. Ukraine's insolvency is imminent, according to the agency. Poland, as well as the whole of Europe, is facing an energy crisis. Yesterday, Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki presented the reasons for the energy problems at the meeting in Działdowo. However, despite the crisis, the Fitch agency maintained Poland's rating at the current level of A-, and the country's economic outlook was assessed as stable. Prime Minister Mateusz Morawiecki reminded that Russia's criminal actions are the main cause of the European economic crisis. The head of government appealed to the entire political class for unity in the face of the Russian threat. This attack towards Poland is very dangerous. It is done through, first of all, high prices of natural resources, high gas prices, high oil prices, coal prices, and therefore other heating sources as well. However, the left politicians believe that despite the difficult geopolitical situation, it will be difficult to reach an agreement between the ruling party and the opposition. I do not dispute that the current geopolitical situation, the war in Ukraine, does not affect what is happening in Poland. Of course, today we have a very, very difficult situation, while it is also true that the government has not prepared our country for such crises. Of course, the opposition can say different things, present different things at the moment, but after all, we can see for ourselves that the situation is extremely dynamic. Let me just remind you that at the very beginning, everyone was convinced that Putin would attack only eastern Ukraine, and he attacked it in its entirety. We thought this war would be very short. It is ongoing, and the Ukrainian nation is bleeding. According to Marek Król, Vladimir Putin has not yet said the last word, and his next barbaric steps may harm Western countries. Imagine if Putin completely shut down the gas supply to Europe, specifically Germany. This would lead to total economic disaster not only for Germany, but for all of Europe and the entire Eurozone. Publicist Adrian Stankowski believes that the appeal for unity made by the Prime Minister is in line with the Polish reason for existence. In this situation, the unity of Polish people is of capital importance. Vladimir Putin's dream would be to divide the Poles. Despite all the problems, the Fitch agency gave Poland a rating of A- for long and short-term investments in foreign and domestic currencies. Diversified economy, well-managed public debt, and responsible fiscal policy allow us to cope with difficult conditions resulting from the negative economic effects of the armed conflict in Ukraine and the difficult situation on the energy market. I would say that if there had not been this crisis, then 100%, not only this agency, but others would have increased these ratings for us. Poland is fighting the energy crisis. One of the elements of the government's actions is the one-time grant for coal in the amount of 3,000 zloty, passed by the parliament yesterday. Earlier today, fire brigades in Friuli, Venezia Giulia, and Lazio continued to battle wildfires with the help of Canadair planes and helicopters as a record summer heat wave kept temperatures soaring. Italian firefighters continued to grapple with a wildfire that started on Tuesday in the Carso area, bordering Croatia and Slovenia, with the fire prompting state-owned shipbuilder Fincantieri to close down its plant in the port city of Monfalcone due to heavy smoke. Another fire broke out on Friday afternoon in the park of Castelfuscano, near Rome, where the flames threatened the pine forest and a restaurant. 3 fire brigade teams were trying to put out the blaze with the help of 4 helicopters and 2 Canadair planes. Italy is experiencing its worst drought in 70 years as thousands of firefighters across southern Europe were battling to contain hundreds of wildfires, ranging from Portugal to France, amid an intense heat wave that caused hundreds of deaths. Yesterday, protesters in Florence glued their hands to the protective glass casing of Botticelli's Primavera painting at the Uffizi Gallery. The 2 climate activists, a man and a woman from Ultima Generazione, meaning last generation, had assistance from a 3rd woman who helped lay out a banner reading Ultima Generazione, no gas, no carbon, at their feet. The video shows a man trying to drag the female protesters away as people looked on at the spectacle. According to the Italian news agency ANSA, Carabinieri police escorted all 3 protesters off the premises, and no damage was done to the artwork. The painting, titled La Primavera, means spring and is among the greatest works at the Uffizi Museum in Florence, Italy. The precise meaning of the painting is unknown. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Please stay tuned for Poland Daily Weather, Poland Daily Business, and some of our other programs. But for me, it's have a wonderful evening.